What if the greatest adventure stories ever told were more than just myths? What if hidden within their lines and stanzas lay actual maps, detailed guides to real places, waiting to be uncovered centuries later? Picture this: a traveler in ancient times, clutching a scroll of Homer's Odyssey, not just for its tales of gods and monsters, but as a practical handbook for navigating the treacherous waters of the Mediterranean. It sounds like something out of a fantasy novel, but historians and scholars are now uncovering evidence that suggests these epic poems were far more than entertainment. They might have been the secret cartographic tools of their age, woven into verse to preserve knowledge across generations. Think about the last time you followed directions from a map, maybe on your phone or an old paper atlas. Now imagine relying on the vivid imagery of a poem to find your way. The Odyssey describes islands with high cliffs crowned with wild figs and harbors where the sea is dark as wine. These aren't just pretty words, they could be precise landmarks, clues to real locations etched into the rhythm of the story. And Homer isn't alone. The Norse sagas speak of fjords and coastlines with such accuracy that modern explorers have retraced their steps, finding actual places that match the poetic descriptions. How did these ancient storytellers know so much about distant lands? Were they travelers themselves, or were they passing down secrets disguised as legend? This is where history and mystery collide. For centuries, we've read these epics as literature, but what if we've been missing their true purpose? What if Beowulf's Grendel wasn't just a monster lurking in the shadows, but a symbolic warning about a real, dangerous stretch of coastline? Or what if the sirens in the Odyssey were more than mythical temptresses? They could have been a coded reference to treacherous reefs or whirlpools. The idea that these poems double as maps isn't just fascinating. It changes how we see the past. It suggests that ancient cultures had sophisticated ways of preserving vital knowledge, embedding it in stories that could outlast empires. So grab your metaphorical compass. We're about to decode the hidden geography of these epic tales, and by the end, you'll never look at poetry the same way again. Long before ink touched parchment, knowledge traveled on the breath of storytellers. Imagine a world without paper, without compasses, where every mountain pass, every safe harbor had to be carried in memory. That's exactly what oral traditions achieved, turning epic poems into living, breathing maps. Take the Iliad. Homer doesn't just recount the siege of Troy. He paints its very streets, its wide-walled gates, its lofty citadel. These weren't just dramatic flourishes, they were vital directions. A listener could reconstruct the city's layout from the verses alone, as if the poet had drawn it in the air with words. And it wasn't just the Greeks. Polynesian navigators crossed thousands of miles of open ocean, using nothing but chants, rhythmic verses that encoded the stars, currents, and even the flight patterns of birds. A single line might describe the way the waves change color near a hidden reef, or how the wind shifts at a specific island chain. These weren't poems, they were survival manuals passed down with such precision that modern researchers have matched them to actual sea routes. The chants were so accurate, in fact, that when European sailors first reached the Pacific with their compasses and charts, they found Polynesians already there, guided by nothing but memory and melody. What's truly remarkable is how these oral maps endured. Without writing, cultures relied on rhythm and repetition to lock geography into collective memory. Think of it like a song you can't forget. The cadence of the verses made them stick. A single misstep in recitation could mean the difference between finding safe harbor or drifting into open sea. That's why these poems were so meticulously crafted, why every landmark was described in vivid, unchanging detail. They weren't just stories, they were blueprints. So the next time you hear an ancient epic, listen closely. Behind the battles and the heroes, there might just be a map whispering to you across the centuries, waiting to be read not just with the mind, but with the feet. Homer's Odyssey might be the ultimate ancient GPS disguised as poetry. Take the Cyclops Island where Odysseus blinds Polyphemus. The text describes a bay with a narrow entrance, a freshwater spring, and a nearby hill perfect for keeping watch. These details align eerily with Sicily's coastline, particularly around Mount Etna, where volcanic caves mirror the Cyclops' lair. Even the name Polyphemus hints at the region's fiery geology. It means much smoke, a fitting nod to Etna's eruptions. Then there's Scylla and Charybdis, the infamous strait where Odysseus loses 6 crewmen. Homer's description of a whirlpool on one side and jagged rocks on the other matches the Strait of Messina, where tidal currents still create dangerous swirls. Ancient sailors would have recognized these hazards instantly, not as monsters but as coded warnings. The 6 heads of Scylla, possibly a metaphor for 6 hidden reefs, their teeth like peaks waiting to tear hulls apart. But the Odyssey's genius goes beyond danger zones. It pinpoints safe harbors too. When Odysseus lands on Scheria, home of the Phaeacians, the poem details a sheltered cove with olive trees and a river mouth, traits found in modern-day Corfu. For weary sailors, these verses weren't just storytelling, they were survival advice. Even the gods' interventions make sense meteorologically. When Poseidon stirs a storm, it mirrors the Mediterranean's sudden sirocco winds, which still catch travelers off guard today. Compare this to ancient sailing manuals like the Periplus of the Arthurian Sea, a Greco-Roman guide to the Red Sea. Both use vivid landmarks, a mountain shaped like a camel's hump, but Homer's hexameters added rhythm to remember by. Oral cultures excelled at turning facts into mnemonics, and the Odyssey's dactylic meter may have been the key to keeping its directions intact across generations. So, was Homer a poet or a cartographer? Perhaps both. His epic doesn't just survive as literature, it endures as a testament to how deeply intertwined knowledge and storytelling once were. The next time you read about Odysseus' wanderings, try tracing his route on a map. You might find the line between myth and reality blurring before your eyes. The world of Beowulf feels like pure myth, a realm of golden mead halls, fire-breathing dragons, and heroes who battle monsters in the mist. But scratch beneath the surface, and you'll find something astonishing. The poem's geography might be as real as the ground beneath your feet. Take Heorot, King Hrothgar's legendary hall, described as the greatest house under heaven. For years, scholars dismissed it as fantasy, until archaeologists uncovered the remains of a massive Viking Age hall in Ledger, Denmark. The site matches Beowulf's descriptions eerily, positioned near a body of water, surrounded by fertile lands, and even showing signs of repeated destruction by fire, just like the poem's account of Grendel's attacks. This isn't just coincidence. Anglo-Saxon Scots, the poets who memorized and recited these tales, weren't just entertainers, they were keepers of history. Every landmark in Beowulf, from the misty moors where Grendel lurked to the sea cliffs where Beowulf fought his final battle, could have served a dual purpose. Imagine a tribe migrating across unfamiliar terrain, relying on the poem's verses to recognize safe routes or contested borders. The mere where Grendel's mother dwells, for instance, might correspond to actual peat bogs in Scandinavia, places so treacherous they became mythologized as monster-haunted. Even the poem's political tensions hint at real territorial disputes. When Beowulf describes feuds between Danes, Geats, and Swedes, it's not just drama. It's a snapshot of early medieval Scandinavia's shifting alliances. The Geats, Beowulf's people, were a real tribe whose territory overlapped with modern-day Sweden. By glorifying Geatish heroes, the poem could have been a subtle claim to land or legacy, a way to assert dominance in a world where borders were written in blood and verse. But here's the most fascinating part, the poem's survival. Unlike maps which rot or fade, stories endure. A Scop could recite Beowulf for generations, preserving not just names and places but the very shape of the land. The rhythm and alliteration, those pounding Old English lines, acted as memory hooks. Try forgetting a phrase like Whale Road for the sea or Sky Candle for the sun once you've heard it. These weren't just pretty words, they were anchors for critical knowledge. So was Beowulf a map, not in the way we think of maps today, but in a world without paper or pixels. It might have been something even more powerful, a living, breathing guide to the past disguised as a hero's tale. Next time you read about Beowulf's battles, ask yourself, are the monsters the only thing hiding in the shadows, or is the land itself whispering secrets? The Vikings didn't just conquer the seas, they mastered them with a blend of myth and precision that still leaves modern scholars in awe. While we often picture them as fierce warriors, their true genius might lie in how they turned stories into survival tools. Take the saga of Eric the Red, where Greenland's icy fjords are described with such vivid detail that modern explorers have matched them to satellite images. The saga doesn't just say they sailed west, it paints the coastline, glaciers like dragon's teeth, black sands where the sea bites the land, directions disguised as drama. But the sagas didn't stop at landmarks. They encoded the very science of navigation into poetry. Kennings, those metaphorical phrases like whale road for the sea or sky sweat for rain, weren't just lyrical flourishes. They were memory aids, compressing complex ideas into unforgettable imagery. Imagine a Viking captain reciting verses to his crew, steer where the swan's path meets the whale's bath. To us, it's poetry. To them, it was a nautical chart, a reminder that migratory birds often fly toward land, and whales surface near shallow feeding grounds. These weren't just stories, they were waypoints. And then there were the sunstones, legendary crystals said to reveal the sun's position even through fog. Modern experiments with Icelandic spar prove it works. A Viking sailor could hold the stone to the sky, twist it until the light polarized, and find their bearing. But here's the twist, the sagas never explicitly explain how to use them. Instead, they're woven into tales like the saga of Olaf Tryggvason, where heroes navigate when the sun's eye is shut. Was this deliberate, a way to protect trade secrets while ensuring the knowledge survived? The saga's brilliance lies in their duality. They're adventure stories, yes, but also technical manuals. When Eric the Red describes drifting past the island where the tides kiss twice a day, it's not just evocative, it's a tidal calendar. Viking navigators knew certain islands had unique current patterns, and the sagas preserved that knowledge in plain sight. Even their monsters might have been warnings. The Hafgufa, a sea beast said to swallow ships whole, could have been a metaphor for whirlpools or rogue waves off Iceland's coast. So, were these sagas travelogues? Absolutely, but with a Viking twist. They didn't just document journeys, they made them unforgettable. Every metaphor, every monster, every storm was a lesson wrapped in legend. The next time you read about longships sailing into the unknown, remember, they weren't just chasing glory, they were following a map written in verse. Virgil's Aeneid reads like a divine mandate wrapped in epic poetry, but beneath its tales of fleeing Trojans and vengeful gods lies something far more practical, a meticulously charted journey across the Mediterranean. Every stop on Aeneas' voyage, from the burning ruins of Troy to the future site of Rome, mirrors real-world locations crucial to Rome's empire. Take Carthage, where Aeneas' ill-fated romance with Dido unfolds. The poem describes its harbor as a crescent of sheltering stone, a detail that matches the ancient Punic city's actual topography. This wasn't just set dressing, it was a reminder to Roman readers of their hard-won victory over Carthage, a rival erased but never forgotten. And then there's Sicily, where Aeneas holds funeral games for his father. Virgil paints the island's Mount Etna with flames that lick the stars, a dramatic flourish, yes, but also a beacon for sailors. Sicily was Rome's breadbasket, its fertile plains and strategic ports vital to imperial supply lines. By weaving these places into myth, Virgil didn't just celebrate Roman dominance, he etched it into collective memory. Even the Tiber's description, where Aeneas finally lands, is unnervingly precise. A river tawny with silt, its banks dotted with white flocks. These weren't poetic abstractions. They were landmarks recognizable to any Roman traveler. But here's the twist: the Aeneid wasn't just a celebration of empire, it was a tool for shaping it. When Virgil wrote, Rome was fresh from civil war, its identity fragile. Augustus needed a unifying myth, and Aeneas' journey provided just that. By tying Rome's foundation to the heroic Trojans, Virgil gave the empire divine legitimacy. And by mapping that journey onto real territories, he made Rome's expansion feel inevitable, as if the gods themselves had charted its borders. The genius lies in the details. When Aeneas visits the underworld, his father Anchises shows him a parade of future Roman heroes, a not-so-subtle nod to Augustus' lineage. And the poem's climax, the battle for Latium, mirrors Rome's real struggles with local tribes. This wasn't just storytelling, it was geopolitical theater, with every verse reinforcing Rome's right to rule. Even the storms that batter Aeneas' fleet reflect Mediterranean sailing hazards, turning the poem into a cautionary tale for would-be conquerors. So was the Aeneid propaganda? Absolutely, but to call it just that misses its deeper brilliance. Virgil didn't merely justify empire, he embedded its logic into the landscape itself. To read the Aeneid was to internalize a map, not just of places but of power. And centuries later, that map still whispers to us, blurring the line between poetry and conquest. The Mabinogion, a collection of medieval Welsh tales, holds secrets far older than the parchment it's written on, secrets that might have guided Celtic sailors across the treacherous Irish Sea. Take Branwen's tale, where the giant King Bran wades through waters, so deep his cloak floated like a ship's sail. This isn't just fantastical imagery, it's a clue. The description aligns with the Menai Strait, a narrow channel between Wales and Anglesey known for its extreme tides. For a bard reciting this tale centuries ago, that line wasn't just dramatic, it was a warning about a real place where currents could swallow the unprepared. Celtic bards weren't mere entertainers, they were living libraries trained to memorize genealogies, battles, and critically, the lay of the land. Their verses wove geography into myth, turning landmarks into legend. When Branwen's tale speaks of the island where the waves sing backwards, it might refer to Bardsey Island, a site famed for its counter-currents, to modern ears its poetry. To a sailor, it was a navigational aid. Avoid this cove when the tide turns. Even the tale's recurring number, 7 years of feasting, 7 survivors returning, could encode tidal cycles as the Irish Sea's rhythms repeat in 7-year weather patterns. The bard's genius lay in duality, a story about a cauldron that resurrects the dead. The tale of Branwen might secretly map freshwater springs along the coast, vital for long voyages. The otherworldly islands described in Pewill's journey, likely real havens like Skoma or Grassholm, where seabird colonies would have been visible for miles, natural beacons for lost ships. By wrapping geography in myth, bards ensured survival knowledge outlasted invasions, famines, and time itself. Imagine a young apprentice learning not just the words but the weight behind them. A phrase like "the ford where the stones whisper" wasn't whimsy. It marked a shallow crossing with echoing pebbles, audible when the tide was low. These weren't stories, they were encrypted maps sung into memory. So next time you hear of a Welsh giant or a magical cauldron, listen closer. The land itself might be speaking, its secrets hidden in plain sight, waiting for those who know how to hear them. Gilgamesh's epic journey isn't just a tale of gods and monsters, it's a roadmap carved into clay, threading through real mountains, rivers, and forests that still exist today. When the poem describes the cedar forest, whose whispers reach the heavens, it's pointing to the towering cedars of Lebanon, a region prized for its timber since antiquity. These weren't just poetic flourishes, they were vital markers for traders and travelers. The forest's location, guarded by the mythical Humbaba, might have been a coded warning. This was a contested zone where Sumerian merchants ventured for precious wood but faced rival tribes and harsh terrain. The epic doesn't just tell a story, it sketches a trade route. Then there's the Waters of Death, a terrifying stretch Gilgamesh crosses on his quest for immortality. Scholars now believe this refers to the Persian Gulf's southern marshes, where shifting tides and salt flats could disorient even seasoned sailors. The poem's vivid details, waves that steal breath, shores where no bird flies, mirror accounts from later Mesopotamian traders. To modern ears, it's myth. To an ancient listener, it was a survival guide. Avoid these waters at low tide when hidden sandbars could strand ships. Even the scorpion men guarding the mountain pass might symbolize real hazards, perhaps bandits or landslides along the Zagros Mountains, a natural barrier between Mesopotamia and the Iranian plateau. But here's the twist. Gilgamesh's path mirrors the very routes that fueled Sumer's economy. The Euphrates, name checked in the epic, was Mesopotamia's lifeline, its currents carrying goods from Anatolia to the Gulf. When the hero digs wells in the wilderness, it echoes real Sumerian engineering. Desert caravans relied on such oases. The poem's cosmology, with its layered heavens and underworld, might even map onto the region's geography. The dark vault of the underworld could reflect the sudden drop into the Gulf's abyssal plains, while the Garden of the Gods might symbolize the fertile delta where the Tigris and Euphrates meet. This wasn't just storytelling, it was cultural memory in verse. Without maps, societies used myth to encode geography. A merchant hearing Gilgamesh's tale would absorb more than adventure. They'd learn where to find fresh water, which peaks marked safe passages, and which coasts hid danger. The epic's survival across millennia isn't just luck. It's proof that the oldest stories often hold the sharpest truths, disguised as legend. So next time you read about Gilgamesh's wanderings, picture a traveler clutching a clay tablet, tracing his steps not just through myth, but through the very bones of the earth. The Mahabharata doesn't just recount an ancient war, it maps one. The battlefield of Kurukshetra, where armies clashed in legendary combat, isn't some mythical nowhere. It's a real stretch of land in modern-day Haryana, India, where pilgrims still walk the same soil described in the epic's verses. The text pinpoints locations with startling precision. The lake of blood where warriors fell, the field of righteousness where Krishna delivered the Bhagavad Gita, even the specific trees under which generals plotted their strategies. These aren't just poetic backdrops, they're coordinates, preserved in rhythm and rhyme for millennia. What's remarkable is how the Mahabharata intertwines geography with theology. The epic doesn't just say where things happened, it tells you why they matter. Take the Sarasvati River, described as a mighty stream in the text but now a dry basin. For centuries, scholars debated whether it was real until satellite imagery revealed its ancient course, matching the epic's descriptions. This wasn't just a river, it was a spiritual artery, its banks dotted with temples and pilgrimage sites still visited today. The poem's details, like the ford where the gods bathed, aren't just lore. They're waypoints on a sacred journey, blending physical travel with divine revelation. But here's the twist: the Mahabharata might be history's first crowd-sourced map. Unlike royal decrees or official surveys, this epic grew through oral tradition, refined by countless storytellers who added local knowledge over generations. A bard in one village might describe a hillock where Arjuna prayed. Another might correct the route to a hidden spring. Over centuries, these fragments fused into a living atlas, where every mountain, river, and grove held layers of meaning. Even today, farmers in Haryana plow up rusted chariot wheels and arrowheads, tangible echoes of a story that refuses to stay confined to parchment. The genius lies in how the epic balances scale and intimacy. It maps vast kingdoms, but also footprints, like the exact spot where Draupadi's sari unraveled, now marked by a temple. These details transform geography into memory, turning the land itself into a storyteller. Pilgrims don't just visit Kurukshetra, they walk through the Mahabharata, tracing battles with their feet and hearing the clash of swords in the wind. The poem doesn't just guide them, it becomes the terrain. So was the Mahabharata a map, not in the way we think of them today, but for thousands of years it did something far more profound. It turned earth into epic, and epic into a path anyone could follow. Next time you read about Arjuna's arrows or Bhishma's vow, remember, the ground beneath those legends might still be waiting for you to step onto it. Imagine walking through a desert so vast and featureless that every dune looks identical, yet knowing exactly where to find water, food, and shelter, guided only by the rhythm of a song. This was the reality for indigenous Australians, whose songlines stretch across the continent like invisible highways, woven into the very fabric of their culture. These aren't just melodies, they're intricate navigational systems passed down orally for over 60,000 years. Every verse, every syllable corresponds to a specific landmark, a rock formation, a dried riverbed, a constellation, transforming the act of singing into an act of wayfinding. Take the story of the Seven Sisters, a songline that tracks the Pleiades star cluster across the night sky, while simultaneously mapping a physical journey through the land. As the stars rise and set, the song's lyrics shift to reflect changes in terrain, pointing to waterholes hidden beneath the red earth or groves of desert oaks ripe with fruit. The song doesn't just describe the land, it is the land, a living atlas where geography and mythology merge. To follow a songline is to walk in the footsteps of ancestral beings, their travels etched into melody. What makes songlines revolutionary is their depth of ecological knowledge. A single line might encode the migratory patterns of emus, signaling when and where to hunt. Another could note the flowering of a particular plant, indicating the arrival of freshwater springs after rains. This isn't just navigation, it's a masterclass in sustainability, a system that respects the land as a teacher rather than a resource. Compare this to Western maps, which reduce landscapes to static lines and symbols. Songlines, by contrast, breathe. They adapt with the seasons, holding not just where things are, but when and why they matter. The precision is staggering. Anthropologists working with Aboriginal elders have documented songlines that stretch thousands of kilometers, crossing dialects and borders without losing accuracy. A custodian from one region can sing their piece of the songline, and another, hundreds of miles away, will recognize it as part of a greater whole, like puzzle pieces fitting together. This challenges everything we assume about pre-literate societies. Without writing, they engineered a mnemonic so robust it outlasted empires. But here's the most profound truth: songlines aren't just about movement. They're about belonging. To sing the land is to affirm a relationship with it, to acknowledge that every hill and river has a story, and that those stories are your own. In an age where GPS drones on with robotic detachment, perhaps we've lost something vital. The next time you plug coordinates into your phone, consider this. What if the map wasn't in your hand but in your bones? Dante's Inferno doesn't just describe hell, it builds it brick by brick, using the very streets and rivers of medieval Florence as its blueprint. The poet's descent through the 9 circles isn't just a spiritual journey, it's a walking tour of his own city, twisted into a moral labyrinth. Take the Arno River, which flows through Florence like a vein. In the Inferno, it reappears as the boundary of the damned, its waters transformed into boiling pitch in the 8th circle, where corrupt politicians writhe for eternity. This wasn't just symbolism, it was a scathing critique. Dante knew his readers would recognize the Arno, just as they'd recognize the politicians he condemned, turning geography into judgment. Then there's the Maelbolge, the 10 ditches of fraudulence where sinners endure punishments tailored to their crimes. The architecture here mirrors Florence's own defensive trenches and fortifications, places Dante would have known intimately from the city's endless political skirmishes. When he describes hypocrites trudging in lead-lined cloaks, their agony mirrors the weight of Florence's own deceit, the betrayals and empty promises of its ruling class. Even the Inferno's famous opening line, midway upon the journey of our life, isn't just poetic flair. Scholars argue it pinpoints a real location, the midpoint of Dante's imagined pilgrimage, aligning with Florence's church of San Miniato, perched high above the city. From that vantage, the entire Inferno unfolds like a moral map, with every circle corresponding to a neighborhood, a landmark, or a memory. But Dante's genius goes deeper. He didn't just borrow Florence's geography, he inverted it. The city's towering cathedral, a symbol of divine grace, becomes the Inferno's frozen lake of Cocytus, where traitors lie encased in ice. The alleyways where Dante once walked as a statesman now house souls flayed by demons. This wasn't random, it was revenge by verse. Exiled from Florence after a political coup, Dante rewrote his homeland as a prison for the very men who'd betrayed him. His hell isn't abstract, it's personal, a meticulous reconstruction of power and punishment where every stone carries a grudge. And here's the twist. The Inferno wasn't just a condemnation. It was a guide. Medieval Christians believed sin distorted the soul, and Dante's hell literalized that idea, warping familiar spaces into grotesque reflections of vice. A Florentine hearing these verses wouldn't just shudder at the imagery, they'd see their own streets differently, recognizing the gluttony in a tavern's excess or the greed in a merchant's palazzo. The poem didn't just map hell, it taught readers to map their own morality onto the world around them. So, was Dante a poet or an urban planner? Perhaps both. His Inferno endures not just as literature, but as a stark reminder that every city has its shadows, and sometimes the most powerful maps are the ones we walk through every day, blind until a poet forces us to see. The Kalevala doesn't just tell the story of Finland, it sings it into being, weaving real fjords and boreal forests into the very fabric of its verses. Picture this, a Runno singer by a crackling fire, chanting lines passed down through generations, each syllable echoing the shape of the land itself. When the hero Väinämöinen searches for lost words in the endless north, he's tracing the shores of Lake Ladoga, still Finland's largest lake today. The poem's dark and thirsty forests aren't just metaphors, they mirror the dense woodlands of Karelia, where ancient birch trees still stand like silent witnesses to the epic's magic. What makes the Kalevala extraordinary is how it treats geography as a living force. The land isn't just a backdrop, it's a participant. when Lau-Hai, the witch of the north, steals the sun and moon, plunging the world into darkness, the poem describes how rivers forgot their courses and lakes grew still as graves. This isn't mere fantasy, it's a coded memory of Finland's brutal winters where ice could choke waterways for months. The Runno singers didn't just describe nature, they encoded its rhythms into verse, turning seasonal cycles into narrative beats. A listener wouldn't just hear about Väinämöinen's adventures, they'd learn when the salmon ran upstream or where the northern lights danced brightest. But here's the twist, the Kalevala's landscapes are also spiritual maps. The famed Sampo, a magical artifact at the story's heart, isn't just a treasure. It's a symbol of fertility, forged in a mythical smithy that scholars link to the copper-rich regions of Lapland. The poem's insistence on the Sampo's power, grinding out salt, grain, and gold mirrors real trade routes where these commodities flowed. Even the epic structure reflects the land's duality. Its rolling meter mimics the cadence of rowing across Finland's 1,000 lakes, while its abrupt shifts echo the sudden storms of the Baltic. This wasn't just storytelling, it was cultural survival. When Christianity reached Finland, the old pagan ways faded, but the Kalevala kept them alive in plain sight. A line about the oak where spirits whisper might mark a sacred grove now hidden beneath a modern town. The Island of the Dead could correspond to real burial sites on lake islands, their locations preserved in rhyme. Runno singers weren't just entertainers, they were cartographers of memory, using cantel strings and alliteration to map a world that official records erased. So, was the Kalevala a passport to the past? Absolutely. But it was also a compass. To hear these verses wasn't just to remember the land. It was to know it, to walk its paths with the certainty of someone who'd sung every rock and ripple into existence. Even today, Finns can trace their fingers along the poem's lines and feel the heartbeat of a landscape that refuses to be forgotten. Polynesian navigators didn't just sail the Pacific, they danced with it, their canoes guided by stars so familiar they called them ancestors. Picture this, a navigator standing on the deck of a double-hulled voyaging canoe, eyes locked on the horizon as he recites a chant passed down through generations. Each syllable corresponds to a star rising in the east, a current shifting beneath the hull, or the flight path of a bird signaling land. This wasn't poetry, it was precision engineering, a celestial GPS etched into memory. The Hawaiian Cumulipo, a creation chant over 2,000 lines long, doesn't just tell the story of the universe, it maps it, threading the names of stars, winds, and fish species into a navigational database. When the chant describes Hoku Lea, the star Arcturus, as the clear light of dawn, it's not just beautiful imagery, it's a waypoint, a beacon that Polynesians followed to find Hawaii from Tahiti, a journey of over 2,000 miles with no landmarks in sight. What's astonishing is how these chants encode physics. The kupuna, or elders, didn't just memorize star paths, they understood refraction, how starlight bends near the horizon, and used it to correct their course. A line like, "The shark's tooth glints low in the wave," might refer to Sirius appearing distorted by the atmosphere, signaling a need to adjust sails. They tracked ocean swells the way a pianist reads sheet music, feeling the rhythm of waves against the hull to detect distant islands. The chants even account for stellar drift over centuries, updating positions as stars slowly shift in the sky. This wasn't guesswork, it was a science so advanced that modern astronomers have matched the Cumulipo's star list to celestial coordinates with eerie accuracy. But here's the real magic, these chants aren't static, they're living algorithms. When Polynesian navigators revived the art of wayfinding in the 1970s, using only traditional methods to sail from Hawaii to Tahiti and back, they didn't just rely on old texts. They consulted surviving kahuna, healers, and scholars who'd preserved fragments of chants in secret after colonization suppressed them. One navigator, Nainoa Thompson, described how his mentor Mau Piailug taught him to see the ocean's pulse by blending star lore with sensory cues. The taste of salt spray shifting near land, the way clouds cluster over warm lagoons. The chants weren't just maps, they were mnemonics for a holistic understanding of nature, where every element, wind, wave, wing, was a clue. Now, researchers are racing to decode these oral maps before the last keepers of the tradition pass. Linguists and oceanographers collaborate with indigenous elders, passing chants for hidden tidal patterns or forgotten star sequences. In 2018, a team recreated a voyage from the Marquesas to Hawaii using only directions from the Cumulipo, proving its routes still hold water, literally. But the deeper question remains, can we ever fully recover what was lost? Colonialism disrupted these knowledge chains, leaving gaps no algorithm can fill. The true brilliance of Polynesian navigation wasn't just in the stars, it was in the community that kept them alive, chanting the sky into memory, one generation at a time. So, the next time you look up at the night sky, try seeing it as they did, not as distant points of light, but as a roadmap, a chorus of voices singing you home. The Shahnama isn't just Persia's national epic, it's a defiant act of cartography, etched in verse to preserve a land's soul under occupation. When Ferdowsi penned his masterpiece in the 10th century, Persia had been under Arab rule for 300 years, its Zoroastrian past fading beneath Islamic influence. But open the Shahnama and you'll find a map bleeding with Persian identity, every battle, every city, every mountain a rallying cry. Take the city of Balkh, described as the mother of cities, its walls standing tall against invaders. Today, its ruins in northern Afghanistan still bear the scars of ancient sieges, proof that Ferdowsi wasn't just spinning tales. He was etching a lost world into memory, one couplet at a time. Look closer and the Shahnama's geography becomes a battlefield of cultural resistance. The epic's hero, Rostam, defends the Oxus River against Turanian foes, a clear parallel to the real-life Amu Darya, a natural border between Persian and Turkic lands. When Ferdowsi writes of Rostam's 7 labors, each trial unfolds in a distinct region: the deserts of Sistan, the forests of Mazandaran, the snow-capped peaks of the Alborz. These weren't random settings, they were the heartlands of Persian resistance, places where local dynasties like the Samanids clung to power even as the caliphate expanded. The Shahnama didn't just describe landscapes, it weaponized them, turning rivers and mountains into symbols of endurance. Archaeology backs this up. In Isfahan, where the Shahnama places King Bahram Gur's palace, excavations have uncovered Sasanian-era mosaics depicting scenes straight from the epic hunts, feasts, and royal processions. The poem's description of Ctesiphan's vaulted arch, once the world's largest, matches the ruins still standing in Iraq. Even the spring of eternal youth, sought by Alexander the Great in the Shahnama, aligns with mineral springs near Persepolis, famed for their healing waters. Ferdowsi wasn't inventing, he was curating, stitching oral histories and half-remembered glory into a tapestry so vivid it couldn't be erased. But here's the genius: the Shahnama's resistance was coded. By framing his work as a history of kings, Ferdowsi dodged censors while smuggling Zoroastrian values like divine justice and the sacredness of fire into Islamic Persia. When he laments the fall of the Sasanians, it's not just nostalgia, it's a blueprint for revival. The epic's climax, where the usurper Zahak is overthrown, mirrors the Persian uprisings against Arab tax collectors. No wonder the Shahnama became a cultural lifeline. Persian rulers commissioned lavish illustrated copies. their miniatures mapping the epic onto real citadels and caravanserais. In the Safavid era, Shah Abbas even renamed squares after Shahnama heroes, turning Isfahan into a living extension of the poem. So, was Ferdowsi a poet or a revolutionary? Perhaps both. His epic didn't just recount battles, it reignited them, not with swords but with syllables. Every time a Persian child heard Rostam's name, they weren't just hearing a legend. They were remembering a land that refused to die. Arthurian legends don't just belong to the realm of fantasy, they're woven into the very soil of Britain, their landmarks etched so precisely that you could almost follow them like a trail of breadcrumbs. Take Camelot, the fabled seat of King Arthur's power. Historians have debated its real-world location for centuries, with contenders spanning from the rocky coast of Tintagel in Cornwall to the misty hills of Cadbury Castle in Somerset. Tintagel's clifftop ruins, where waves crash against ancient stone, match medieval descriptions of Arthur's birthplace, a place between sea and sky where the wind sings of kings. But here's the twist. Archaeological digs there have uncovered luxury goods from as far away as Turkey and North Africa, proving it was a thriving trade hub in the 5th or 6th century, exactly when Arthur might have ruled. Was Camelot a real fortress, its memory preserved in verse long after its walls crumbled? Then there's Gawain's infamous journey to the Green Chapel, a tale dripping with symbolism and geography. The poem Sir Gawain and the Green Knight describes a path through frost-bitten forests and valleys where voices whisper. Scholars have traced this route to Lud's Church, a deep moss-covered chasm in Staffordshire's Peak District. The site's eerie acoustics make even a hushed word echo like a challenge, mirroring the Green Knight's supernatural game. But the clues go deeper. Gawain's trek crosses rivers and ridges that align with old Saxon boundaries, suggesting the story might encode territorial disputes. When the text warns of the wild men of the woods, it could be referencing real Celtic holdouts resisting Saxon expansion, their defiance immortalized as myth. Even the Lady of the Lake's watery domain might have a foothold in reality. Lake District locals point to tarn-fed pools like Lyn Lydor in Snowdonia, where divers have found Bronze Age weapons eerily similar to Excalibur's legendary forging. The lake's sudden storms and hidden currents match Arthurian lore, where the sword's gift comes with a price. These aren't just pretty coincidences, they are fragments of a lost map, a time when borders were written in verse, not treaties. So, were Arthur's knights following poetic clues? It's possible. In a fractured post-Roman Britain, where Roman roads decayed and old landmarks were swallowed by forest, stories became survival tools. A bard's tale about a white stag near the fallen oak might lead to a hidden spring or a defensible hill. The Round Table itself, often dismissed as pure fiction, could symbolize a coalition of tribal chieftains, its knights representing real warlords who rallied against Saxon invaders. The legends endure not because they're flights of fancy, but because they're rooted in the land itself, whispering secrets to those who know how to listen. Next time you walk Britain's countryside, watch for the echoes. That crumbling chapel, it might be the Green Chapel's twin. That fog-draped lake, perhaps it once held a sword or a kingdom's hope. The line between Arthur's Britain and ours is thinner than you think, blurred by centuries of storytelling that turned geography into legend, and legend into a map no parchment could hold. The canals of Tenochtitlan didn't just carry water, they carried stories. When Aztec poets chanted the Cantares Mexicanos, their verses painted the city's layout with startling accuracy. The turquoise waters where herons stand, the house of mirrors that pierces the sky. These weren't just metaphors, they were coordinates. Every temple, every causeway, every floating garden appeared in the hymns, transforming ritual into a living map. Imagine a priest leading a procession, his words not just praising the gods but tracing the very path to their altars. The poetry was a compass, and the city was its needle. But the canters did more than describe, they encoded. Nahuatl poetry relied on diffrasismos, paired phrases that conveyed deeper meanings. A line like, "the jade, the quetzal feathers," didn't just signify wealth, it pointed to the Templo Maya, where offerings of both were piled high. The smoking mirror wasn't just a reference to the god Tezcatlipoca, it was a landmark, the gleaming obsidian walls of a specific shrine. To outsiders, these hymns sounded like spiritual odes. To the Aztecs, they were wayfinding tools, their rhythms matching the measured steps between sacred sites. Even the act of singing mattered. The rise and fall of pitch mirrored the city's topography, with high notes marking bridges and low tones indicating the lake's still depth. This raises a chilling question. When Spanish conquistadors burned Aztec texts, what exactly were they destroying? Some scholars argue the canters were more than poetry. They were territorial archives, proof of Aztec claims to the land. A hymn detailing the place where the eagle perches might correspond to the founding myth of Tenochtitlan, but it also reinforced the Aztecs' divine right to rule the Valley of Mexico. By erasing these songs, the Spanish weren't just suppressing religion, they were dismantling a legal system written in verse, yet fragments survived, hidden in plain sight. After the conquest, indigenous scribes secretly recorded canters in the Florentine Codex, disguising them as Christian hymns. A line about the flowered cross might seem pious to Spanish eyes, but to Nahua readers, it evoked the chinampas, the floating gardens where corn and flowers intertwined. Even today, elders in Mexico City's barrios recite snippets of these poems, their cadences echoing the old city's grid. The canals are paved over now, but the words still flow, a subterranean river of memory. So were the canters maps, not in the European sense, but in a world where land and spirit were inseparable. Perhaps the truest map wasn't drawn on bark paper. It was sung into existence, its verses as binding as any surveyor's line. When you walk Mexico City's streets today, listen closely. Beneath the traffic, the ghosts of those songs still whisper, guiding the lost home. In the quiet rustle of cherry blossoms and the murmurs of mountain streams, the Manioshu holds more than just beauty, it holds directions. Japan's oldest collection of poetry, compiled over 1,200 years ago, doesn't just celebrate nature, it navigates it. Take a simple tanka about Mount Yoshino. Like the snow lingering on its peak, so too does my heart cling to you. Romantic, yes, but to a Heian-era pilgrim, those lines were also practical. Yoshino's snow-capped summit wasn't just a metaphor. It was a landmark, visible for miles, signaling the approach to a sacred Shinto shrine nestled in its foothills. The poem wasn't just a love letter, it was a trail marker. What makes the Manioshu extraordinary is how it blends spirituality with geography. Shinto, Japan's indigenous faith, sees God's kami in every rock and river, and the poems mirror this belief. A verse praising the clear voice of the Isuzu River near Ai's Grand Shrine isn't just pretty imagery, it's a sonic beacon. Pilgrims would follow the river's sound upstream, knowing its melody grew purer as they neared the shrine's torii gates. Even the rhythm of the poems mirrors the land. The 5-7-5-7-7 syllable structure of tanka mimics the cadence of walking, 5 steps uphill, 7 across a ridge, as if the verses themselves were pacing out the journey. But here's the twist, these poems also encoded danger. A lament about the treacherous whirlpools of Naruto wasn't just poetic melancholy, it was a warning to sailors avoiding the strait's deadly currents. Similarly, a wistful line about autumn leaves hiding the mountain pass might signal a route best avoided in winter when avalanches swallowed trails. The Manioshu's poets, aristocrats, monks, even emperors were often travelers themselves, and their words carried the weight of lived experience. A single poem could be both art and advisory, its beauty masking urgent practicality. Modern researchers have tested this theory, using the Manioshu to retrace ancient pilgrimage routes. At Kumano Kodo, a network of trails winding through the Kiai Peninsula, verses describing moss-covered stones where the fox dances led archaeologists to uncover forgotten shrines exactly where the poems suggested. Other lines, like "the bridge where the moon trembles," matched moon viewing spots along the Takeda Highway, where travelers would rest beneath the same willow trees mentioned in the verses. The correlation is uncanny, as if the land itself dictated the poems, and the poems, in turn, remembered the land. So was the Manioshu a map, not in the conventional sense, but in a culture where nature and divinity were inseparable. Perhaps the truest guides weren't drawn on paper. They were sung into the wind, whispered between syllables, waiting for those who knew how to listen. Today, as you walk Japan's ancient paths, try reciting a tanka under your breath. You might find the stones answering, the rivers humming along, an echo of a time when poetry wasn't just words but a path home. In the vast expanse of the Sahel, where the horizon blurs into golden dust and ancient baobabs stand as silent sentinels, the griots of West Africa have long been the keepers of more than just stories. They've been the living archives of the land itself. Picture a griot under the stars, his voice weaving tales of kings and battles. But listen closer, and you'll hear something extraordinary. The whisper of rivers, the rustle of trade winds, the very pulse of the earth. The Sundiata epic, Mali's foundational saga, doesn't just recount the rise of an empire. It traces the contours of the Niger River's bends, the salt caravans' paths, and the groves where gold-laden soil glittered underfoot. These weren't just embellishments, they were survival guides disguised as legend. Take the epic's description of the golden branches of Wagadu, a phrase that might sound like fantasy until you realize Wagadu was the heartland of the Ghana Empire, a realm so rich its rulers tossed nuggets into the Niger to appease the spirits. Griots didn't just sing of gold, they mapped its sources, embedding directions into verse. A line like, "Where the hyena laughs at the crossroads," might mark a crucial junction where caravans turn toward Timbuktu, while "the baobab that drinks the moon" could signal a rare water source in the arid scrub. To outsiders, it was poetry. To merchants and travelers, it was navigation. The griots' genius lay in duality. Their genealogies, stretching back centuries, weren't just about lineage. They were territorial claims, tying families to specific lands through oral deeds. A single stanza might affirm a clan's right to farm near the Senegal River by naming ancestors who tilled that soil when the stars were young. Even the rhythm of their speech held meaning. The rising and falling cadence of a griot's recitation mirrored the undulating dunes of the Sahara, a subliminal guide for listeners crossing those very sands. Modern researchers have tested this theory, comparing griot oral maps to satellite imagery. In Mauritania, a griot's description of the valley where the wind writes on stone led archaeologists to a canyon covered in ancient petroglyphs, and beneath them long-buried wells. In Mali, verses about the mountain that wears a hat of clouds aligned perfectly with the rainy season fog over the Manding Plateau, a cue for when to plant crops. The correlation is uncanny, suggesting these stories weren't just passed down, they were refined over generations, sharpened into precision tools for survival. But here's the most profound truth: griot traditions weren't static, they adapted. When colonial powers redrew borders, griots wove new landmarks into old tales, ensuring their people could still find their way. A 20th century griot might reference a French-built railway alongside the crocodile-infested bend of the Niger, stitching modernity into ancient memory. This fluidity challenges everything we assume about oral cultures. Without writing, they engineered a system so resilient it outlasted empires, droughts, and upheavals. So were griots the Google Maps of the Sahel? In a way, yes, but with a depth no algorithm could replicate. Their maps weren't just about where to go, they told you who you were when you got there. A griot's song didn't just guide your feet, it rooted you in a lineage, a landscape, a legacy. Next time you hear of Sundiota's victory at Corina, listen for the land beneath the legend. The battle might be myth, but the river it was fought beside, that's real, and thanks to the griots, it always will be. The Popol Vuh doesn't just tell the story of the Maya world's creation, it charts it, threading sacred geography through every verse. When the hero twins descend into Xibalba, the underworld, their path isn't just a metaphor. It's a tangible journey through the caves and cenotes of Guatemala's highlands, places so real you can still walk them today. Take the cave of Naj Tunish, its walls adorned with ancient murals depicting gods and rituals. The Popol Vuh describes Xibalba's labyrinthine tunnels with eerie precision, a damp, echoing chambers where the walls whisper with the voices of ancestors. Modern explorers have found these passages littered with pottery and offerings, as if the mythic underworld was once a pilgrimage route, its dangers and turns memorialized in story to guide the living. LiDAR technology has ripped away the jungle's veil, revealing ruins that mirror the Popol Vuh's descriptions. Near El Mirador, archaeologists uncovered a causeway stretching between pyramids, matching the text's White Road, where the hero twins outwitted the Lords of Death. Even the twins' ballgame, a cosmic battle against Xibalba's champions, finds its echo in stone courts scattered across the Patain, their alleys aligned with solstice sunrises. The Popol Vuh doesn't just recount a myth, it preserves a sacred itinerary marking where to pray, where to leave offerings, and where the veil between worlds grows thin. But here's the revelation: these landmarks weren't just spiritual, they were survival tools. Cenotes, those shimmering sinkholes the Maya revered as gateways to the underworld, were also vital water sources. The Popol Vuh's tale of the twins retrieving the water of life from Xibalba might encode the locations of hidden springs, their depths guarded by stories to prevent overuse. Similarly, the Tree of Abundance in the myth could correspond to ceiba trees which still tower over Maya villages, their roots threading into cenotes like natural wells. The text wasn't just theology, it was ecology, a way to sustain communities in a landscape where water and divinity flowed together. The most striking evidence lies in the stars. The Popol Vuh's narrative aligns with the Milky Way's seasonal shifts, the White Road transforming into the World Tree as constellations pivot overhead. Maya astronomers used these celestial patterns to time plantings and harvests, turning myth into an agricultural almanac. When the text says the twins became the sun and moon, it might memorialize a real astronomical event, like a solar eclipse that once guided Maya kings' rituals. The Popol Vuh wasn't just read, it was performed, its verses tracing paths across earth and sky. So, did the hero twins walk real paths? The answer might be written in the land itself. Next time you see a cenote's dark waters or a stela carved with gods, remember, these aren't just relics, they're pages from a living map, one that still whispers where to tread lightly and where to kneel where the past isn't buried but breathing. The Psalms don't just praise the promised land, they measure it, stitching borders and landmarks into verse like a sacred surveyor's report. Take Psalm 60, where the Jordan River isn't just a body of water but a boundary stone. Moab is my wash basin, upon Edom I toss my sandal. To modern ears, it's poetic bravado, but to the Israelites in Babylonian exile, these lines were a territorial claim, a way to hold onto a homeland they couldn't see. Every mountain and valley in these texts, from the Dew of Hermon to the heights of Zion, wasn't just scenery. It was a covenant written in geography, a reminder that even in captivity, the land still belonged to them. Archaeology reveals how precise these descriptions were. When Ezekiel prophesies the restored temple's dimensions down to the cubit, his vision mirrors the actual layout of Jerusalem's ruins. The river flowing from the temple in his vision might symbolize spiritual renewal, but it also echoes the Gihon Spring, the city's ancient water source. These weren't abstract metaphors, they were blueprints preserving practical knowledge for the day of return. Even the Song of Deborah in Judges 5, which recounts a battle near the Kishon River, pinpoints the exact marshlands where chariots would have bogged down, a tactical detail disguised as poetry. But here's the twist: these texts weren't just nostalgia, they were resistance. During the Babylonian exile, when Israel's identity was under siege, scribes doubled down on territorial poetry. Jeremiah's letter to the exiles instructs them to plant gardens and marry in Babylon, but his earlier prophecies obsess over the vineyards of Samaria and fig trees of Judah. The message was clear: remember where you're from. By reciting these descriptions, the oil and honey of Canaan, the stones of the field that marked tribal allotments, exiles kept the land alive in collective memory, turning liturgy into a map they could carry in their mouth. The prophets took it further. Isaiah's highway for the remnant wasn't just a spiritual metaphor. It likely traced the actual route from Babylon to Judah, dotted with way stations like Beersheba and Hebron. And when Nehemiah rebuilds Jerusalem's walls centuries later, he doesn't consult a parchment map. He follows the verbal descriptions passed down through generations, the same ones enshrined in scripture. The poetry had become so precise it functioned as civic engineering. So were these verses maps, not in the way we think of them today, but in a culture where land was identity, where losing territory meant losing your place in God's story. These words were more than art. They were deeds written not on clay or papyrus, but in the hearts of a people determined to return. Even now, when pilgrims recite psalms atop Mount Scopus or wade in the Jordan, they're not just retracing steps, they're walking a path laid down by poets who turned memory into mortar and verse into a vow: this land is ours. Tibetan Buddhist pilgrims don't just walk around Mount Kailash, they unravel it, their footsteps tracing a path older than time itself. To the untrained eye, the mountain is a solitary peak in the Himalayas, but to those who chant its verses, it's a living mandala, its slopes etched with invisible lines of sacred geometry. The Kora, the ritual circumambulation of Kailash, isn't just a physical journey. It's a coded map where every rock, every gust of wind, every syllable of mantra corresponds to a step on the path to enlightenment. Pilgrims recite texts like the Kangri Kapo, a poetic guide that describes the mountain's hidden geography, the crystal stairway where dakinis dance, the silver river that flows backward into the sky. These aren't metaphors, they're waypoints, aligning with actual glacial streams and cliffside caves where meditators have vanished into retreat for decades. The genius lies in the merging of sound and space. Vajrayana Buddhism teaches that the universe is constructed from sacred syllables Om Aham, and the landscape around Kailash embodies this. Pilgrims chant Om Mani Padme Hum as they walk, their voices syncing with the mountain's resonance. Scientists have recorded infrasound pulses in the region, frequencies too low for human ears but felt in the bones, as if the earth itself were chanting back. The path's 52-kilometer loop mirrors the 52 syllables of the Arapachana Manjushri mantra, each step a syllable, each prostration a punctuation mark in a cosmic sentence. Even the direction matters. Clockwise circumambulation isn't arbitrary. It follows the sun's path, mirroring the movement of stars across the Tibetan plateau, turning the pilgrim into a celestial cartographer. But here's the revelation: the Kora isn't just spiritual, it's a survival manual. The verses warn of the valley where the sky leans close, a real glacial pass where sudden storms kill the unprepared. They describe the Bridge of Rainbows, a slick rock face near Durapuk Monastery that's safest crossed at dawn when frost grips the stone. Modern climbers with GPS devices have found these descriptions eerily accurate, as if the poems were distilled from generations of whispered advice. The Kangri Kapo even encodes seasonal shifts. When the snow lion's mane turns gold, signals autumn, when the high passes are briefly free of ice. This isn't poetry, it's a pilgrimage algorithm refined over millennia. The most profound layer, the mandala's illusion. To Buddhists, Kailash isn't just a mountain, it's the axis of the universe, its four faces corresponding to the cardinal directions, its summit the palace of Chakrasamvara. Pilgrims aren't circling rock, they're traversing a blueprint of the cosmos, their bodies the compass needles. When they pause at the Saptarishi cave where 7 sages meditated, they're not just resting, they're aligning with a spiritual latitude. Even the act of prostration, measuring the path with one's body, echoes ancient surveyors who paced out boundaries step by step. The Kora doesn't just map the land, it becomes the land, dissolving the line between waka and walk. So is circumambulation cartography. In Tibet, the question answers itself. Every pilgrim who completes the Kora leaves with more than blisters or blessings. They carry a map etched into their breath, their pulse, their bones. Not a map to somewhere, but a map of everywhere, where every syllable chanted is a coordinate, every step a stroke of ink on the scroll of the sky. Chaucer's Canterbury Tales might seem like a collection of raucous medieval stories, but look closer and you'll find something astonishing. A meticulously detailed travel guide disguised as poetry. The pilgrim's journey from the Tabard Inn in Southwark to Canterbury Cathedral wasn't just a literary device, it was a real route, one that medieval travelers would have known intimately. Every stop, every landmark, every bawdy anecdote about the miller or the wife of Bath was anchored in geography. The road they followed, the old Kent Road, still exists today, its modern pavement tracing the same path trodden by Chaucer's characters over 600 years ago. This wasn't just fiction, it was a snapshot of a journey anyone could take, complete with pitfalls, pleasures, and practical advice. Take the Tabard in itself, where the pilgrims gather. Historical records confirm it was a real establishment, famed for its ale and lively clientele. When Chaucer describes its broad shoulders and stables wide, he's not just setting the scene, he's giving travelers a benchmark. A place like this, bustling and well-equipped, would have been a reliable starting point for anyone heading southeast. Even the pilgrims' complaints about accommodations or food, like the reeve grumbling over sour ale, read like medieval Yelp reviews, warning future travelers where to tread carefully. Chaucer's eye for detail turns each tale into a trip log, documenting the realities of life on the road, from muddy ditches to shady innkeepers. But the tales go deeper than mere logistics. The pilgrim's route was no accident. Canterbury Cathedral housed the shrine of Thomas Becket, a martyr whose cult drew thousands of pilgrims yearly. Chaucer's characters aren't just random travelers, they're stand-ins for the diverse crowds who'd have walked this path: merchants, clerics, laborers, each with their own reasons for making the trip. When the pardoner hawks fake relics or the knight tells a chivalric romance, they're echoing the very real dynamics of pilgrimage culture. where spirituality and commerce collided. The road to Canterbury wasn't just a physical journey, it was a social ecosystem, and Chaucer mapped it with anthropological precision. Modern historians have traced the pilgrims' stops to actual 14th century landmarks. The watering of St. Thomas, where the group pauses, aligns with a natural spring near present-day Deptford, a known resting spot for travelers. The brook where the miller's tale unfolds might be the River Darrant, still crossed by a medieval bridge in Kent. These weren't arbitrary choices. By grounding his stories in real geography, Chaucer gave his audience a shared reference point, a way to visualize the journey even if they'd never left London. For those who had made the trip, the tales would have felt like an inside joke, a playful mirror held up to their own experiences. Here's the twist: Chaucer's work may have served a dual purpose. While entertaining, it also functioned as a subtle guidebook, teaching readers how to navigate the social and physical challenges of pilgrimage. The tales don't just describe the road, they prepare you for it. The Franklin's lavish feast, a nod to the indulgent stops where wealthy travelers splurged. The summoner's corruption, a cautionary tale about trusting officials in unfamiliar towns. Even the rhythm of storytelling tales told to pass the time reflects the actual cadence of medieval travel, where long stretches of road demanded diversion. So, was Chaucer the first TripAdvisor reviewer? In a way, yes, but his genius lay in blending practicality with artistry. A modern guidebook lists hotel ratings and distances. Chaucer embedded his advice in wit, satire, and human drama. His pilgrims don't just move from point A to point B. They stumble, scheme, and reveal the messy humanity behind every journey. The road to Canterbury wasn't just a path on a map, it was a stage, and Chaucer's tales remain the ultimate script, proving that the best travel writing doesn't just tell you where to go, it shows you who you might meet along the way. In the vast, sun-baked deserts of the American Southwest, where mesas rise like ancient sentinels and hidden springs whisper beneath the sand, the Hopi and Navajo peoples didn't just navigate, they sang their way across the land. Their trail songs, passed down through generations, are more than melodies. They're living maps etched into rhythm and pitch. Picture a Hopi elder walking the rim of the Grand Canyon, his voice rising and falling in a cadence that mirrors the terrain. Each note corresponds to a twist in the trail, each pause to a fork in the path. The song doesn't just describe the journey, it is the journey, a sonic blueprint of the earth itself. Take the Hopi migration cycles, oral histories that trace their ancestors' footsteps across the Colorado Plateau. These aren't vague legends, they're precise itineraries. A line about the red mesa where the eagle nests might pinpoint a specific rock formation near Orebi, Arizona, still visible today. The song's tempo slows at the Valley of Dry Bones, warning travelers of a waterless stretch where the sun beats mercilessly. Even the intervals between verses matter. The length of a hum could signal the distance to the next spring. To an outsider, it's music. To a Hopi runner carrying messages between villages, it was a survival tool as vital as a canteen. The Navajo take it further. Their Blessing Way ceremonies include songs that map the 4 sacred mountains marking Dinata, their traditional homeland. The lyrics don't just name these peaks, they encode the routes between them. A phrase like, "Where the turquoise boy sings," refers to Mount Taylor's blue-green slopes, while "The House Made of Dawn" guides listeners toward Hesperus Peak. The song's intricate patterns, repetitions, pauses, crescendos mirror the landscape's contours. A sudden high note might mark a steep ascent, while a descending scale could trace the path into a canyon. Modern hikers attempting to follow these songs report an uncanny accuracy, as if the melodies themselves were tuned to the land's frequency. What's truly remarkable is how these songs adapt. Unlike static paper maps, trail songs evolve with the singers. A Navajo guide might tweak a melody to reflect a landslide that blocked a pass or a new water source discovered after rains. The Hopi, too, adjust their migration chants as droughts or erosion reshape the desert. This fluidity makes oral maps uniquely resilient. They don't just record the land, they respond to it, updating themselves with each generation's lived experience. Scientists are now studying this phenomenon, comparing trail songs to satellite data. In one study, researchers played a Hopi corn planting song to a group of volunteers, then asked them to trace the described route on a map. The result, their paths overlapped almost perfectly with ancient footpaths still visible in aerial surveys. The song's hops between notes corresponded to cairns, stone markers left by ancestors. It's as if the melodies are mnemonics for muscle memory, teaching the body to move in sync with the land. So, could humming really unlock a canyon's path? For the Hopi and Navajo, the answer has always been yes. Their songs dissolve the line between art and navigation, turning geography into a chorus of wind, rock, and memory. Next time you hear a desert breeze rustle through the sage, listen closely. It might just be singing the way home. Byzantine poets didn't just write about Constantinople, they rebuilt it in verse, brick by golden brick. Imagine standing before the Hagia Sophia's towering dome, its mosaics glinting in the sun, then closing your eyes and hearing its grandeur resurrected in the rhythm of a 1,000-year-old poem. That's the power of ekphrasis, the Byzantine art of describing artworks and architecture with such precision that words became surrogate blueprints. When the poet Paul the Silentiary penned his ode to the Hagia Sophia in the 6th century, he didn't just praise its beauty, he measured it. The spherical dome hangs as if suspended from heaven by a golden chain. Modern architects have found his descriptions so accurate, they've used them to reconstruct lost details, like the original placement of the church's silver altar screen, long since melted down for coinage. But the Hagia Sophia was just the beginning. Constantinople's poets chronicled everything from the chalk gate's intricate mosaics to the Million, the empire's golden milestone marking distances to every corner of the known world. When the historian Procopius wrote of the Ni ecclesias, walls clad in shimmering Polynesian marble, he wasn't exaggerating. Excavations in the 1990s uncovered fragments of that very stone, matching his descriptions down to the vein patterns. Even the city's lost monuments, like the great palace's Kurukshetra's throne room, live on in verse. A 10th-century poem by Constantine of Rhodes details its ceiling's celestial map, with stars of sapphire set in gilded plaster, guiding scholars to identify its likely orientation toward the morning sun. These weren't just pretty words, they were forensic tools preserving what fire, war, and time erased. The secret lay in the poet's training. Byzantine ekphrasis wasn't free-form admiration, it followed strict rhetorical rules demanding exactitude. A poet couldn't just say a statue was lifelike. They had to detail the curve of its brow, the drape of its robe, even the play of light across its bronze surface. This discipline turned verses into time capsules. Take Christodoros of Coptos' ekphrasis on the statues of the baths of Zeuxippos, his line-by-line catalogue of the bathhouse's sculptures. Here Hercules leans on his club, their Medea glares with knitted brow, allowed archaeologists to identify statue bases found in the ruins, even when the figures themselves had vanished. The poems were so precise they functioned as inventory lists for a lost world. Why go to such lengths? In an empire where iconoclasm could erase centuries of art overnight, poetry became a covert archive. When Emperor Leo III ordered all religious images destroyed in the 8th century, monks secretly copied ekphrastic descriptions of mosaics and frescoes, hiding them in liturgical texts. Centuries later, these verses guided the restoration of churches like the Kora Monastery, where restorers used 14th-century poems to recreate Christ's genealogy in exact Byzantine color palettes. The poets hadn't just described art, they'd smuggled its DNA past the censors, ensuring rebirth. Yet the greatest marvel isn't just the accuracy, it's the ambition. Byzantine ekphrasis didn't just record, it competed with the art it described. A poem about the Archangel Michael's icon wasn't a passive reflection, it was a rival masterpiece, using metaphor to outshine the original's gold leaf. When John Geometres wrote of the Pantocrator Mosaic, his eyes pierce like lightning yet brim with mercy. He wasn't just observing, he was translating visual awe into linguistic splendor. In a city where emperors and bishops dueled with monuments, poets wielded their verses as equal weapons, building a parallel Constantinople that no army could sack. So was poetry the empire's true archive, perhaps, but it was also something more, a mirror held up to power, proving that while marble crumbles and gold is looted, words, when crafted with Byzantine precision, can outlast even the mightiest domes. Today, as scholars stitch the city back together using these ancient verses, we're left with a haunting thought. The poets never meant for us to dig up their words. They meant for us to hear them, and in hearing, to rebuild. Rumi's poetry doesn't just whirl with ecstatic devotion, it pulses with the heartbeat of Konya's streets, each verse a hidden ledger of the city's bustling trade and spiritual crossroads. Picture this, a 13th-century caravanserai at dusk, its gates creaking open to admit dusty merchants from Samarkand, their silks shimmering beside bundles of spices. Now listen to Rumi's words. The caravan of grief has passed, yet the scent of rose oil lingers. This isn't just a metaphor for divine longing, it's a snapshot of Konya's markets, where rose attar from Damascus was bartered for Anatolian wool. Rumi's lines are studded with these clues, turning his mystical odes into coded maps of Silk Road commerce and Sufi pilgrimage. The whirling dervishes, often seen as symbols of cosmic harmony, might have spun along actual geographic axes. Rumi's descriptions of circling like the compass needle align eerily with Konya's layout, a radial city where major trade routes converged like spokes on a wheel. The Mevlevi Lodge, where Rumi taught, stood at the intersection of roads to Baghdad, Aleppo, and Constantinople, its position mirroring the Sufi ideal of balance between earthly and divine. When Rumi wrote, "Every path leads to the same truth," he wasn't just preaching unity, he might have been tracing the routes of merchant caravans that carried Sufi ideas alongside saffron and lapis lazuli. Archaeologists have uncovered caravanserais mentioned in Rumi's poetry, their courtyards still bearing the grooves of wagon wheels. One verse describes the inn where the fountain never sleeps, a likely reference to the Sultan Han, a real stopover with an ingenious hydraulic system that kept its basin flowing even in drought. These weren't arbitrary images, they were waypoints for travelers, both physical and spiritual. A line about the lantern that guides without flame could point to the Akai brotherhoods, Sufi guilds that offered lodgings to weary traders, their hospitality a beacon in the literal and metaphorical dark. But here's the revelation: Rumi's geography wasn't just practical, it was alchemical. His frequent mentions of turning lead to gold weren't solely about inner transformation. Konya sat atop rich mercury deposits, a key ingredient in medieval alchemy, and its bazaars thrived on the trade of cinnabar, a scarlet mineral used in dyes and rituals. The red gold in Rumi's verses might have been a nod to this commerce, blending material and mystical wealth. Even his beloved reed flute, symbol of the soul's exile, mirrored the actual reeds cut from Konya's marshes, fashioned into pipes by nomadic shepherds who played them at caravanserais. The genius of Rumi's poetry lies in its layers. To a merchant, it was a guide to Konya's markets. To a dervish, it charted the soul's journey. And to us, centuries later, it's a palimpsest, a map where the ink of commerce and the gold leaf of devotion bleed together, inseparable. So the next time you read of Rumi's drunken ecstasy, remember, his words might have been tipsy not just with divine love, but with the heady perfume of silk road spices carried on the wind through Konya's open gates. From Homer's storm-tossed seas to the Aboriginal songlines that pulse across the Australian desert, these ancient epics were never just stories, they were lifelines. Every metaphor, every rhythm, every divine intervention was a carefully placed landmark, a whispered warning, a breadcrumb trail through the wilderness of human experience. Think about it, when a Polynesian navigator chanted the stars into alignment, or a Viking skald sang of fjords shaped like dragons' teeth, they weren't just entertaining their listeners. They were passing down something far more vital, a way to survive, to remember, to claim their place in the world. What's astonishing is how these poetic maps outlasted empires. Stone crumbles, ink fades, but a well-woven verse, it can cross oceans and centuries, carried on nothing but breath and memory. The Mahabharata still guides pilgrims to the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Navajo Trail songs still echo the contours of the four sacred mountains. Dante's Inferno still lurks beneath Florence's cobblestones. These texts weren't just descriptions, they were contracts between people and their land, written in a language that time couldn't erase. And here's the real magic. These maps worked because they were alive. Unlike static parchment, they adapted. A griot might tweak a genealogy to reflect a new alliance. A Hopi elder could adjust a trail song after a landslide shifted the path. Even Homer's Odyssey, frozen in writing, continues to reveal new layers. Modern sailors have retraced its routes using stellar navigation techniques lost for millennia, proving that the poem's clues still hold water. These weren't just guides, they were conversations with the land itself, updated with each generation's footsteps. This changes how we see literature. We're taught that poems belong in books, that myths are just fanciful tales. But what if they're more like user manuals for the human experience? The Popol Vuh didn't just explain Maya cosmology, it mapped the sacred caves where rituals unfolded. The Kalevala didn't just recount Finnish heroes, it marked the forests where spirits dwelled. These texts were never meant to be read passively. They were meant to be followed, to be lived. So what happens now, in an age of GPS and satellite imagery? We're finally learning to read these old maps again, not as relics but as revelations. Linguists decode Aboriginal songlines with LiDAR. Archaeologists use the Shahnama to locate lost Persian forts. Every time we match a poetic description to a real mountain or river, we're not just solving a puzzle. We're reclaiming a way of seeing that's been buried under centuries of ink and asphalt. The land remembers these stories, and if we listen closely, it might just sing them back to us. Hit subscribe because history's greatest adventures aren't just in the past. They're hidden in plain sight, waiting for those who know how to read